Going to give you their feedback in a moment, a debate requires us to choose a winner, which I think is particularly when we're doing a practice session, is entirely artificial, and it doesn't really matter who won tonight, so don't worry about who won, who did. The point is to take the feedback that you're going to get from the three adjudicators, the things that you did well, keep with those, and things that perhaps you could do differently. And I think from our discussion, there are things that are, for both teams, very similar ideas that I think you did well and that you could do better. We'll talk about that in a moment. Before we do go to the adjudicators, though, I would like to just do a quick poll of the audience on just one or two things that you thought were really good about each team. What do you think that they did well?
Good examples.
Good use of examples?
Yes.
Okay, why are examples good?
Because they reiterate what has just been said, like they prove a point.
Okay, so
if
they
your
help prove their point?
Yeah.
Good, okay, thank you. Anybody else?
I think it's impressive when you don't have your notes, and I know it's always good, it's a bit of a security blanket to just have your notes, but that tends to also tie you too much to looking down and each time.
Okay, thank you.
I really like the acting. I think,
acting.
Yeah, I think you guys were really that. Because this is more fun, right? If you are engaged in something and you enjoy debating, I think it's just more fun to listen. So I really like that.
Yeah, cool.
I like the personal stories, what the young child, especially that one, really emotional. If you bring in that, it makes a big difference.
Yep.
And especially on the other side, the gentleman which he spoke, he really took pause at some times in the speech delivery, like he came and stopped here, and then he made a point, and he gives an audience, oh, what is he saying? Going to say next. It gave me, that was very well done.
Okay, cool, thank you. Anybody else? Anything we could do differently there? Just a couple of quick points about what could be done differently.
I think there's a thin line between aggression and assertion, and assertion is always more impactful than aggression.
What the hell do you mean?
I mean, it's not.
You've got the cup, but be careful. It's not a milk crate, but it's a cup.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? Anybody else? Something could be done differently? You guys know a lot about things you'd want to do differently, but we don't care what you think. It's all about what we think.
I got one.
Yep.
As a professor, my mind goes faster than my mouth. And I noticed that was in your case often too. You guys were presenting something and you were just already 3 sentences ahead, and you're trying to just, you're catch up with your mouth. Just slow down, because the audience is never able to follow that fast.
See, I'm quite the opposite. My mouth goes off and I'm going, where the hell are you going?
So I already gave some feedback on the arguments and some of the things that they could add to the list. To build on what was just said, not only slow down, after you make a point, make a pause. Let us chew that for a while. Let us agree with you, because if you rush me, then I'm like, okay, I wanted to agree with you, but you didn't even give me the time. So,
and you can emphasize, right, through the pause. You can emphasize your point.
Yeah, also regarding that, moving too much, not moving at all, the extremes probably don't work that well. Maybe if you make a point, then start pacing, use that sparingly.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll go to the adjudicators now, and I'll start with Phil to give points for both teams about what was done well and what could be done differently.
Thank you. I thought it was a great debate. I really enjoyed it because it's not often I hear such spirited debating. I had some Toastmasters issues that came up in my mind, which had been mentioned, which was everybody spoke, most debaters spoke 100 miles a minute. And if you're looking at a set amount of time, if you stop and plan out what you're going to say and maybe how you're going to say it, you can make your point much more effectively if you speak at a slower pace. And time-wise, you don't have to say so much. You can concentrate on the major points that you wanted to talk about. I'd like to see the speakers think about the stage areas that they're using, and not plan what you're going to do, but when you're making a point, well, I found there was an awful lot of walking back and forth and talking while you're doing it without purpose. And to me, for the speakers, if they make a point on one item, stop, maybe move a bit across the stage, make a point on another item, and carry on like that. I too thought sometimes the notes were a bit distracting. When you've got notes in your hand, it slows you down from using your body to make a point. I was really impressed that one speaker, I think it was Serbi, had no notes, and that meant the speaker was able to take their time communicating with the audience. Benedict, I thought, spoke at a very good pace. He was easy to understand. And when you get into it, again from a Toastmaster's point of view, think about using your voice. You can raise your voice to make a point, or you can lower your voice to make a point, so long as people can still hear you. So think about that. Now, I jotted down about new material. I was a bit concerned in looking at notes. I know it's okay for the third speaker to use a slightly different example to make a point of what's been said before, but I thought we had some new material included in the opposition's conclusion for the third speaker. The first thing I jotted down was tell them, and I'm referring to the lead speaker Rashama in the proposition. I found that she talked for a while about what she wanted to talk about, but she then, a little ways into it, maybe 30, 40 seconds, said, this is what we're going to talk about. And to me, the most effective thing is to start out telling them what you're going to tell them. Set the scene, get into it, and then start building the case that follows on that. So I thought it was I'm going to conclude there. I thought it was a great debate. I enjoyed it enormously, and I learned a lot from the speakers. So thank you for the opposition, and thank you for the pros.
Thank you so much, Phil, for educating. We got a little something for you, precisely 700. That's for you, Phil. Thank you, Phil. Thanks so much. Can we have Mike Kano, please? Mike with his feedback. Thank you.
So remember the scoring. There was 40% for matter, there was 40% for manner. So even though most of the feedback from our audience related to the manner, it's only worth, and I can't do it with my fingers, but it was only worth 40%. So 60% wasn't to do with manner. So as a team, when you've got that 1 hour that you're trying to prioritise in, you've got to decide how much you're going to focus on modifying manner or pitching to the audience through various dramatic techniques versus the 60% that relates to matter and method. So you need to triage. And I'm going to talk about triaging a couple of times in my feedback. So firstly, let's talk about matter. So this was worth how much?
40%.
40%. Excellent. So I love the facts. Now, we've all got smart devices. I presume that in the time you're given to sort of go over there and strategize, you are able to use those devices. So you've got facts and more facts, and you've got Donald Trump facts, which aren't really facts. So you've got all these facts at your perspective. And the problem is facts are actually a bit of a currency that's quite debased in our society. So we can quote numbers at each other and hurl numbers at each other, which I felt both teams did, and they hurled numbers at each other. But we need another layer to give credibility to those numbers. So we need to be able to go. Harvard Business School showed in 2019, I think we're in, 2019, that the rate of student suicides in postgraduate MBA programs globally was the following. And that's a gripping statistic, both to the audience, who are predominantly postgraduate students, but you also claimed credibility with that stat because it was Harvard Business School. So I'd urge you, when you're triaging in that hour and thinking, how on earth are we going to talk to practice makes perfect, you're also devoting, part of your team is doing that quick search to find credible statistics. So you're going to have that extra layer to those statistics. Because I think it can be a rugby match and you're throwing these stats at each other and the audience just, it's like a tennis match. The audience just don't see credibility in the statistics by themselves. I'm also going to suggest both teams think about how do we do an opening that's punchy and grabs the audience. Because we felt overall that a number of times it didn't really grab the audience. It was nice, but it didn't grab them. And as a team, you might think about how are you all going to do perhaps a similar type of opening or a similar style. Whether you have a particular gesture that you do, whether you throw yourself across the stage, or whether you have a particular slogan that you're using as a handle for each of your speakers. Think about how do you build a strong, punchy opening. What's your brand, as someone raised earlier? Now in terms of method, and I'm going to finish with manner. So method was 20%. So my understanding was that we had to have a structured agenda. So that meant that the first speaker needed to say, you know, I am the first speaker, I'm going to do these things, and here's the second speaker, and here's the third speaker. So I don't think either team actually managed to set out a structure for the audience. What I'd also suggest, and even though it's not really an evaluation context, is team cohesion. One aspect of team cohesion is you're up on stage, you're visible to the audience at all times. So you should be looking at whichever of your team is out there giving their all at the front, you should be riveted by them, absolutely beaming at them. So you're showing as a team your cohesion. So balance how often you feel you need to create notes and look like a human switchboard, and how much you are riveted by your speaker and you're believing anything that's happening for that person. Because you're role modeling to the audience because they're looking at you as well as the speaker. So finally, let's talk about manner. So in terms of manner, we've heard a little bit about speed. One thing I'd say is there's a difference. There's how quickly I talk, and then there's when do I pause. So they're two different things. There's firstly slow down the speaking speed so people can follow every word that I say. And then it's when do I have a punchline I want the audience to emotionally react to or to sit back and think about. And that's a punchline pause. So it's what's the speed I speak at, and it's how long do I pause for. And finally what I'll do, and Phil started to talk about, to reference it, in Toastmasters we have different types of gestures. So at the moment I'm using emphasis gestures when I want to make a point. So it's a bit like underlining or bolding. My other option though is to show, don't tell. So if I'm, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't Einstein, who 499 times tried to create a light bulb, but I think it was Edison, not Einstein. But I heard Einstein. Sharing. But a key point there is, how do we show someone trying to think about a light globe on stage? We could just talk about it and do some hand gestures around emphasizing, or we could literally do a light globe and a light bulb moment. So we can demonstrate into that audience. You're going to be in a room much, much larger than this more than likely, and you'll be on a raised stage. So large, expansive, descriptive gestures are going to differentiate you from people who might be gripping their notes and trying to be very analytic. So it's how can you do large, descriptive gestures as part of your presentation. I also liked how many personal stories people tipped in, because personal stories bring passion and authenticity. So we really enjoyed it. It's very interesting to hop into a Toastmaster facilitated debate, see people get given a topic that's a little bit difficult, I thought, but good practice for the next level. And just, I really, really enjoyed seeing all of you so enthusiastic and just really giving it all in what I felt was a very difficult topic. So, well done. Thank you.
Mike, thank you so much for coming up here and chatting for us. A little gesture from our side too.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
And lastly,
So before I give my feedback, I have one real important question. Who the hell is Sachin Tendulkar? Is that it? Is he a sportsman of some sort or something? I have no idea who he is. Not at all. Not a bit.
You invited him.
I thought it was a really interesting, fun debate. I now know a lot more about women than I really thought I knew. I know a lot more about Indian sports people than I ever really wanted to know or care, which is good. Thank you very much for that. I want to talk a little bit about, we've got some really great feedback from Phil and Mike, and I'm not going to go over what they've already done. What I want to do is talk a little bit more about the actual competition of debating and the sorts of things that will be expected of the judge. And I want to go back to what is a very core thesis of mine and a very core thesis of the public performance or persuasion and rhetoric as it's now called course, which is that it's not about you. That when you're trying to persuade an audience, it's not about you, it's about them. Cicero said, the great rhetorician Cicero said, that the cooks are preparing a great feast for the guests, not for themselves, or something like that. There's also an argument that comes from psychology that says, from linguistics, that the job of a persuader is to answer the questions in the audience's mind. That's all you're there to do. As a social psychologist, I also know that the core to influence is your ability to connect with your audience, your ability to connect with your followers. The whole thing you're supposed to be doing in a debate is not arguing with them. What you're doing is arguing with them. What you're doing is you're trying to make them your best friends. You're trying to build a relationship with your audience. Not with your adjudicators, but with your audience. You want to win them over. And there's three ways in which you can do this, and it's really well established and it's really well understood by most rhetoricians. And it came from Aristotle, and it's called the three proofs. You know about these, I know you've talked about these. Logos, pathos, and ethos. Or appeals to reason, appeals to the audience's values, not emotion, appeals to the audience's values, and appeals to credibility or perceptions of your credibility. And I think this is where you need to work on all three of these things from the audience's perspective. Now, when we're talking about appeals, you're appealing to your audience's understanding of reasoning, your audience's understanding of what makes somebody credible, your audience's understanding of what makes something reasonable. So you're working from that perspective. When you're talking about arguing, when you're talking about logos, it's not about facts and statistics and data. It's not about logic, although that's the core idea of what you'll be working with. It's about appealing to the audience's reason. One of the bits that I use in my class is the eulogy from Julius Caesar, where you can see that, Mark Antony is appealing to the audience's reason, but in fact what he's doing is actually throwing a whole bunch of fallacies at them. He's asking them to be reasonable in their judgment, but he's not actually giving them good reasons. So what you need to do is appeal to the audience to be reasonable, appeal to them to think through this thing without emotion. But then what you want to do is also use the audience's values and appeal to those values, which means you need to understand a bit more about those values. It may be that we don't really care about Sash and Tabduga. We probably care more about guys whose name is Smith. If it's an Australian audience. If it's an Indian audience in front of you, great. If it's a Pakistani audience, once again, do not do Sash and Tabduga. Think about what your audience is going to appeal, what's going to appeal to them most in terms of their reason, as well as their... Now, the other thing is they also need to trust you more than anybody else. Now, one of the things that I do is teach at a military and staff college down in Canberra. And one of the things we found in the research with military is that we know that in really difficult situations, when you're under fire, when you are likely to die unless you follow a leader, that they look for leaders to give them structure and direction. You need to give your audience structure and direction. I'll come back to that in a moment. But the most important thing we know from the research is that they don't just follow anybody's structure and direction. They follow the people who they trust. They follow the people that they have a relationship with. have a pre-existing relationship with. So you've got to build that relationship, and then you've got to give them structure and direction. So the first thing that I want to say is make sure that you appeal to your audience. Think about them. It's all about them. The second thing is you've got to have structure and direction. The first speaker must establish the direction of their argument, which means you have to have, to use Mike's prep example, you have to have a very clear point. So for the affirmative, it's already set for you. You state that practice makes perfect. And you did exactly the right thing in terms of defining what practice makes perfect. You just defined practice, you defined perfect, and so on. You did a really good job on that. But you also need to establish the credibility of your team. Why you're the right people to believe. Why you are the ones that are going to be the ones that are most likely to be believable by the audience in this thing. So I'll talk a little bit about what your speakers are all about and why you know more about this topic than anybody else. Give a little bit of credibility. But then, really importantly, in terms of debate process, and you lost lots of marks on this, both teams lost lots of marks on this, you need to establish the agenda. You need to say, my team today is going to speak about this, and my second speaker is going to build on this, and my third speaker will do this. So introduce your team and introduce the process. And then you need to stick to that process. Neither team did that. The second speaker has a really, really important job to do. It is not to rebut the other team. The second speaker has to continue to build on that relationship with the audience, and most importantly, you have to really establish that your job is to actually give all the information that's required to support the point. Your job is to support the first speaker more than anything else. You can do rebuttals, but your focus is really on building your argument. When you do rebuttals, the rebuttals must not just refute the other side, they have to support your point. Because the rebuttals aren't just refuting the other side, they're about establishing the credibility of your point. When it comes to the third speaker, from a debate process point of view, the third speaker is the most critical speaker, more important than either of the other two. Because they're the sales guy. They're the one who is going to ask for the order. And neither party, neither group asks for the order. The way you ask for the order is by just restating the benefits of your argument. In other words, no, my first speaker said this. This is the point that we wanted to put forward. Our second speaker built on this point and this point out. And what I want to do is just show that this is what we're all about and this is why you should believe us, and I'm going to ask you for your vote. And so you put it back to the audience and you really do ask them to say yes to your position. And then pause. In terms of the matter, manner and method, I think logos, pathos and ethos, by the way, if you think about it, all fits into that. In terms of the matter, I think from my perspective and from the judge's perspective, we gave the points to the affirmative. For method, you're pretty much equal in terms of the method. I think we're both have some work to do in terms of method. In terms of manner, the delivery, we gave the negative. Was this two, wasn't it?
That's the negative.
You pointed me to the wrong thing.
That's
So,
the negative.
the negative, we saw as having a stronger process in terms of your manner, in terms of delivery. Overall, I think there's like half a point between the two teams.
That's quite close. Which is why we took so long. Sorry.
So what I'd really like to say is you're both winners.
There's only one column.
But we have by a slight margin given it to the negative. Just to finish that off, if I could just make a small point. I think about 10 years ago, myself and Truk Vo, a student at the time, established the public speaking and debating group. And we held a few meetings, and some people turned up and some people didn't, and there wasn't a great deal of structure to it, because I'm not particularly structured. And we came to the view that we really needed to have something like Toastmasters that would give it some structure, but also would give it life outside of Macquarie University as well. And Toastmasters have done an extraordinary job in helping us to move that through. From where we started 10 years ago to where I think you are now in the competition, and the fact that you're actually putting these practices together, I think is tremendous. And I think the more we do these kinds of things that are beyond just the lectures, the better the school becomes, the better the quality of our students become, the better we get a reputation for being more than just punching PowerPoints down your throat. I also have to say, if it wasn't for the international students, we'd be lost. They continue to turn up time and time again to these sorts of post-curriculum kinds of ideas or extracurricular kind of ideas. So thank you very much for being involved and being part of that. Can I also just point to some of the faculty that's sitting at the back there? We have these sorts of things for students. We have these faculty, these extracurricular meetings and so on, and it's always the same people that turn up. Norma, Marosh and Kate, thank you so much for coming along. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you very much. Oh, we did
Yeah, you have to get a photo.
That just ruined that photo. Thank you.
Now, can we have all the Twitter judges on screen? Well,
So he's going to selfie.
no, it's gonna, so they can all capture you, and then,
Let's be quick so the team can actually get in the trophy
well,
they want
the
it.
moment everyone has been waiting for, and
That's terrible, but it's bad. That's terrible. Really?
and the winner
There's something wrong with your phone.
is,
The winner is?
winner is.
And the winner is the negative.
That's the possible of the judges. Come on.
Congratulations to the negative
filling
team
it
on
with
winning
beer.
this.
I think, are you paparazzi?
Thank you, and
Almost as big as you.
big
Yeah,
hug.
it's almost as big as me.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. We just have one last word of thanks for the president, and then we can move from ribbons and drinks. Bhushan, all over to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'd just like to finish a quick word of thanks. Thank you for the judges, Randal, Mike, and Phil for showing up, and thank you for the participants. I hope you had a good experience, and thank you for the staff for attending. Kate, Norma, Marush. Thank you for attending, and thank you for the audience for making it the event. This was our first event, so I apologize if we missed something, and I hope you had a good time. Thank you.
Did you